Hello. So finally we are starting the main Sicilians. And again, I will do it in this order. First, I start with all alliance with second e6 after knight f3, then knight c6, and finally second d6. Of course, well, there will be some transposition. I will explain you that this or that variation you can get via, let's say, knight c6 move order or e6 move order. Some lines like dragon, for example, you can get with black only by playing d6. This I will explain you in every single line, that you know there are different ways to get this variation if there are. So let's start with e6. So finally d4, of course the most logical move. C takes d4, knight takes d4. Here first, well, I would like to cover some sidelines. Well, let's say d6 move doesn't make much sense because anyways white can play knight c3 and black has nothing better than to transpose to some other lines of Sicilian. But actually white has a chance to play c4 here, and I believe he should do this because, okay, now he gets this pawn structure, quite a good version of this pawn structure, bishop e3, and this is simply very comfortable for white, and I don't see any point actually to play force d6 for black. Nothing to gain and something to lose. So then what else? There is a move bishop c5. Well, also it's not a good move. There are different ways of playing for white, but I think bishop e3 is the best, and it's practically refuting actually, even though you can still play knight c3 also, and that is probably black will have nothing better than to transpose to one of the lines we will be checking later, but bishop e3 is almost a refutation. Here probably relatively best for black is to play d6. But okay, then knight c3, let's say a6, queen d2, and white is just playing for long castle, the typical play, and bishop on c5 is actually misplaced. At some point it can be exchanged and the pawn on d6 will start to be hanging, so it's simply better for white, but probably the other moves are even worse. Okay, queen b6 is actually pretty bad according to the engine, because of even b4 actually is very strong. The engines are saying just the idea that bishop takes b4 check, knight d2, and black really has issues simply to finish development. Or after b4, queen takes b4 check, c3, queen b6, knight d2. Okay, white wants, I guess, knight c4, knight b5. Not easy for black to actually to manage to castle in this position. Let's say a6 is supposed to be the best move according to engines to cover the b5 square, but then queen g4, g6, queen g3, and here also according to computer white has a big advantage already, which is quite logical. He has a huge development advantage, and black has all these weak black squares, so b4 is good, but also knight a3 actually is a good move here. A little bit strange, but why not? White wants to play knight c4, and then the best line according to engines is very sad, queen a5 check, queen d8, coming back, and after knight b3 also white is simply better. So bishop c5 is, well, I mean, the only thing that there is a move knight f6 here after bishop e3, knight c3, bishop b4, the strange way of playing. We will now check this position with a bishop on c1. There is a certain point to have bishop on e3, because after e5, knight d5, at least white doesn't have, it's not so strong already, queen g4, but actually he can also simply play bishop d2, and this position we will consider later. We are knight f6, force knight f6, knight c3, bishop b4 move order, and it seems to be better for white also. But in addition, also knight db5 seems to be very strong and also gives white an advantage. So bishop c5 is not recommended. Queen b6 is a better try. Strangely enough, it looks a little strange, the move, but somehow it more or less works. Of course, white has many options, but the most logical is to play knight c3, and now bishop c5. Otherwise, there is no point to play queen b6. Knight a4. Now the play gets very direct and actually ends up in a position which is a bit sad for black, even though maybe not too bad. Queen a5 check, c3. Now if, okay, white is threatening b4 simply, so if bishop e7, knight b5 is very strong. White wants to play b4 and bishop f4, and it's just better here. So bishop takes d4 has to be played, queen takes d4, pretty direct play, knight f6. Now there is a certain problem with the knight on a4, so white is playing knight c5. There was a short period of popularity of this variation sometime in the middle of 90s, when some strong players played it a couple of times, like Nigel Short, I remember, against Vasily Ivanchuk in Novgorod. He played it once, but without much success. But now this line is, it's quite a rare guest in the tournament practice, because it seems that probably relatively best for black is to castle here, because the main idea of black was to play knight c6 here, queen d6 and b6, knight b3, and now actually knight takes c4 seems not to work so well because of queen takes c6. This is an important variation to know with white. And after dc6, knight a5, b8, bishop e3, well, black is pawn up, but his pawn structure is terrible. Bishop on c8 is bad, and white has a clear advantage in this endgame. So again, maybe black should finally better to play queen e5 here after knight b3, but that leads simply to takes f3, d5 probably, and simply white is having a very nice plus in this endgame, two bishops, and black is going to fight for a draw here for the rest of the game. So yeah, not funny this. Probably castles is the best. f3, knight c6, queen f2, and now d5. Well, it's clear that if white will just develop, he will have two bishops and a better position, so black has to hurry. Now again, white has various ideas, but probably the most logical is bishop g5, with the idea after d4, of course, white just wants to take on f6 and then take with a knight on e4. So knight d7 is to be played. And now knight b3, queen c7, ed5, ed5. And probably white can play long castle or bishop e2. Well, it's not too bad for black, but it's clear that white has a nice plus here. And that is, well, I wouldn't say refutation of the line, but if white knows this variation, then somehow it becomes very unattractive for black to play it. But maybe in some rapid chess, in blitz, if on the certain level, if you think that your opponent doesn't know this line, it might be a good surprise. Yeah, and at the end of the day, you can play this main position with isolated pawn. It's not too bad for black. So it can be played practically, but objectively not enough to equalize. So then what else? Well, other moves like a6 and knight c6 we are going to consider in next lessons. So for now, knight f6 is another option, knight c3. Now white already threatens to play e5. Of course, he couldn't have done a5 immediately because of queen a5 check and queen takes e5. So knight c3, now e5 is a threat, and black doesn't have so many options actually here. So knight c6, this is a serious variation, but we will consider it via the second knight c6 move order. I will explain why later. So just you can, for the moment, you can just notice that this variation is very, very serious and important. But today we are going to consider in this position, well, you have to defend against e5 somehow. So with the bishop b4, it's an old line in the pre-computer era, was supposed to be tricky, you know, and not so clear maybe even, but now with engines, it's already practically refuted. White is playing e5. Now knight d5 is the only move, because knight e4 is even worse. After queen g4, there is only move already, only reasonable move is knight takes c3, and this transposed to the position we are going to check after knight d5. Actually, just to tell you that here queen takes g7 is very strong, because if knight jumps, anywhere with a check, then white is playing c3 and double attacks on h8 and on b4. And after rook f8, a very important move here is a3. And this is a refutation which is known already for ages, a refutation of this variation. And here white is basically winning simply. There is nothing better than knight b5 check, ab, knight takes d4, bishop h6. This line I've been shown by my trainer when I was 7 years old already. I remember it. Even without engines, queen e7, people already found this, queen e7 and bishop d3, and it just lost for black. So the better move is knight d5. And here queen g4 is the main move, the most aggressive move, but actually bishop d2 is also very good. It simply gives white an advantage, which makes it really sad, this line that even if bishop d2 already simply better for white, then what's the point of playing this? So knight takes c3, bc3, and now, well, if bishop e7, then queen g4 is pretty unpleasant move. Again, bothering this g-pawn. And in case of bishop f8, at least stopping queen g4, but white simply develops bishop d3, castles, and so on, and he has, of course, a bit spoiled pawn structure, but a huge development advantage. And it's not the way really to play chess, especially in Sicilian, to play bishop b4 followed by bishop f8. So white is better here, but queen g4 might be even stronger, also gives white a significant advantage. The knight takes c3, queen takes g7, as I've already mentioned, is pretty bad for black. So then black has a choice between g6, playing g6, which weakens pretty much black squares. Now again, bishop d2 is very good, also better for white, but maybe even stronger is knight db5, knight c6, queen g3, castles a3. Black doesn't really have much of a choice here, and okay, if you just take on c3, it's simply much worse with all those black squares. So bishop e7, and now bishop h6, bishop h4, queen h3, and this position is pretty bad for black actually. So then after queen g4, well, the old line was castles, bishop h6, g6. It was supposed to be interesting exchange sacrifice. After bishop takes f8, black would take with the queen on f8, and then there is a certain compensation, even though still probably objectively in white's favor this position. But then engines, they found knight db5 move, and this is really very painful for black. Even though it's, you really need to know it because it doesn't look so clear. I mean, after queen a5, the idea is just to make long castle. It doesn't look so clear, knight c3, but actually engines are already given like +1.5 for white here. Knight c6, and now you don't take exchange, you just continue to attack. h4 followed by h5, and as strange as it might look, it doesn't look so bad for black, but it seems that the attack is almost unstoppable. Bishop takes c3, b takes c3, so white do not care about all those checks. White of black taking pawns, he's just starting his attack. Of course, in the worst case, he can always take an exchange on f8, and this is pretty bad for black, this position. So again, maybe in some blitz, this line can be played, bishop b4, but frankly, even as you've seen, even by playing e5, bishop d2, white keeps an advantage, and I'm afraid queen g4, if your opponent knows this variation, it might end very quickly and badly, so not recommended. So then, but of course, after knight c3, very serious move is 5d6. So after d6, we get to the so-called Scheveningen pawn structure, because I think for the first time somebody started to play like this in the Sicilian in a tournament which was held in, I think, Dutch city Scheveningen, and so then this kind of setup was called after this place. Because of that, yeah, so of course it looks pretty passive, and only with time people realize that actually this setup with pawns on d6 and e6 is not too bad, and it has its venom. I mean, it's very flexible. So since then, of course, there were a lot of game in different move orders with this pawn structure when black is playing d6 and e6. But nowadays, this system is in fact in crisis. I mean, objectively, again, of course, it's perfectly playable on a certain level. I'm talking about, well, top grandmaster level. Yeah, it's now a rare guest. Because actually, yeah, first, what I want to tell in this lesson, a very important thing which I understood actually in Sicilian, a kind of abstract conceptual point, is that most of the time in most of Sicilians and also in this Scheveningen structure, actually the most dangerous plans for white are connected with long castle and pushing pawns on the king side. I mean, once white plays for short castle, most of the time, I mean, doesn't mean that it's totally harmless, not at all, of course, it also makes sense, but in general, black is not in such a danger, yeah, if white is playing for short castle. So, and you will see in most of the Sicilian lines, I mean, the main systems, the most popular and the most dangerous systems are connected with long castle. So that also took quite some time for people in the era when there were no engines to understand that actually, the most dangerous systems are connected with very sharp and aggressive play with white. That's why quite often white would just play bishop e2, you know, knight c6, bishop e3, bishop e7, castles. Okay, of course there is a huge theory there, but I will not cover it here because I think that objectively, well, if you want to play it, you can have a look yourself. But I just believe that there are much more dangerous ways of playing. I mean, much more prospectors for white. So why then to cover those systems with a short castle? I believe black is in quite some trouble in this knight f6 variation. Therefore, I will show you, I mean, in this knight f6 and d6, I'm going to show you the most dangerous lines. Well, first of all, white can simply play bishop e3 here. And in any case, black has nothing really better than to transpose to whether playing a6 to the line, to the variation of Najdorf, a6, bishop e3, e6, which of course we are going to consider later. Well, a variation which is also now in a certain crisis for black. Black is most of the time trying to play with e7, e5 and not e6 nowadays. Or let's say after knight c6, this position we are going to consider during this lesson today. A bit later, queen d2 is a main move, so this we are going to check. But in fact, the major problem is nowadays is considered to be a move g4, so-called Keres attack. Very strong grandmaster, was very close to become world champion. Paul Keres from Estonia. He was a great theoretician who had a very, very good understanding of openings and found a lot of different ideas in many various openings, and also g4. That is his idea, which was quite revolutionary, I would say, for that time, because it was not really the way people play chess. They wanted first to develop pieces and then only to start some attacks, but he understood that there is a chance to start it immediately. And I believe, again, there are some lines which are, I would say, more or less playable for black, and you can play it on a certain level. But frankly, I cannot really see if white knows the theory here. I think that black is just worse in all those positions. So he gets simply white gets an improved version of other typical Sicilians, and that's maybe a reason why it almost disappeared from the grandmaster practice, this move order, knight f6 d6, because of this g4 move. Again, having said that, of course, on a lower level, it's perfectly playable for black. Position is complicated and sharp, but again, we are talking about objective assessments, and g4 is a very, very unpleasant move. Because, the thing is that if black is just developing normally, then this g5 is, you have to play knight d7, bishop e3, for instance, and white just pushes h4, f4, like, let's say, bishop e7, h4, castles, f4, not the only move, but also good, and, it's just, it's very important to push these pawns. Black cannot really make use of the fact that white haven't castled yet, because he has nothing really better probably than this play with a6 and takes on d4, b5, but white is already quite close, white's pawns, and this h5, g6 coming quite often. So this seems to be quite a bad version of the Sicilian for black. White is just better. More or less same goes, maybe a little bit better version for black of this position is to play a6, but still g5, knight d7, white is playing in the same fashion. Bishop e3, b5, a3 simply, let's say bishop b7, h4. And again, this is a pretty bad version of typical Sicilians for black. Because he cannot really make short castle. Let's say bishop e7, queen d2. Okay, short castle will probably lead to very quick h5, g6 and very quick disaster. So he has to play for a while with the king on the center, and doesn't have so much counterplay. I mean, those type of positions were reassessed because some 40 years ago people considered that black has some play in this position, but in fact not so much. In fact, white is very quick with his attack here, and it is just better for white. Or knight c5, let's say bishop g2. It's also not good. So again, of course, in rapid chess or blitz, it's playable for black. People who like to play Sicilian, it's still sharp, and lots of let's say ways for white to go wrong, but objectively, I can just tell you that computer gives already strong engines are given like +1 in this position for white, so which means something. So that's why, there is another move, e5. This is a very principal move, actually very important move to try to fight against g4, because again, if not g4, then this move order, knight f6, d6, would be perfectly playable and quite interesting. So that is a way for black to equalize, playing in a very straightforward manner, but I think it fails to equalize. Well, first of all, the old line, bishop b5 check, bishop d7, it takes on d7, queen takes d7, knight f5. Of course, strategically, black has weakened d5 square, and his position is pretty bad strategically. White wants just to play bishop g5. But the point is tactical, is to play h5, and the idea is that in case of g5, black wants to take knight takes e4, and there was some theory here, knight takes g7, bishop g7, knight e4, and so on, but seems that black holds here. That's why after h5, white just takes gh5 here, and knight takes h5. This position is actually not too bad for black. Maybe still white is a bit better. Knight g3, g6. Theory goes, you exchange on h5, bishop e3, followed by knight d5. Well, black has a kind of better pawn structure, but still the d5 square is very tasty for white's knight, and Again, computers give some minor plus for white here. Still, maybe white is still slightly better, but that can be analyzed, and this doesn't look like refutation. Yeah, doesn't look too bad. But I think then knight f5 is more principal move for white, and here black's position is pretty dubious, I would say. Again, the same idea is h5, because otherwise why did we lose tempi with e6, e5, weakening the d5 square? So the idea is to play very direct way. h5, and now bishop g5, hg, knight d5. Very direct again, very aggressive way of playing. And this position seems to be in white's favor. It's not so easy, but better for white. After bishop takes f5, now it's bishop takes f6, important intermediate move, takes, bishop h6. Actually, now black wants to play bishop g5 and then rook h4. If queen takes g4, it might be not so bad. So, for instance, if white wants to take with a rook on g4, then bishop g5, this position is not bad. So here, a very important move to be sure that white is better. Maybe not the only one, but a really very, very strong move. And quite a move which is difficult to find, in fact, over the board, which is h4. Also, it's the first line of the engine, of course. Yeah, so this move is, white is just trying to stop his opponent from activating his rook on the h file. And after h4, white is better. For example, knight d7. Well, the idea is that, of course, queen takes g4, there is queen a5 check always. Yeah, so here after knight d7, simply rook g1 followed by rook g4. I mean, white has a very strong control on the white square, so once he takes back the pawn, he just will develop c3 and so on, and having this white square control, he will be better. So the most principle is to take on h3, but after rook takes h3, it seems that, also here actually there is no direct way for white to gain something special. I mean, he just sacrificed the pawn, but king e2 also a strong move. But simply that black's king is in permanent danger, and there is very unpleasant pin on the h line, and it seems simply by playing positional chess like this, c3, queen a5, a4, and computer gives white, well, a considerable plus here, and it's actually also visually, I would say that it looks very unpleasant for black, at least from the practical point of view, but even objectively seems to be that despite the fact that black is pawn up, but white is better. So that is an e5 move. Also, not, as we can see, not really, life is not easy for black after e5, but main move is h6. And that was always supposed to be the main line, but actually after h4, this position, the worst thing for black is that white's play is very easy and simple here. And that is maybe even worse news than simply the fact that computer assesses it as a better for white, this position, because sometimes in Sicilians, it can be objectively in white's favor, but a very complicated play where black has a lot of counterplay. So, I mean, in a practical sense, situation is not clear here. Okay, again, of course, if white knows the typical plans in this position, actually the play is quite simple for white, and I don't know what is the best choice. So white for black, white just wants to play rook g1, g5 to continue his play on the king side, kicking this knight on f6. Now, okay, what to do? If a6, rook g1 followed by g5, then let's say if bishop e7, main theoretical move here is rook g1, and after d5, it's still slightly better for white. I mean, ed, knight d5, but it at least may be playable. But nowadays, engines are actually given queen f3 as very powerful move. And it seems to be true, just protecting the rook on h1, and white wants to play g5 next. And again, here the engine assessment is very depressive for black. It gives, I think, more than +1 already here, strangely enough. After knight c6, he just takes, plays g5, knight d7, g8, and simply bishop d2 followed by long castle. And there is not so much play on the b line in this position, and black's king is in the center, very unsecured. And it seems that it's really not good, black's position. So then knight c6 was always the main move here. Rook g1, you see white is doing the same thing all the time. Now, objectively, maybe the best move is d5 here. Even if it's pretty sad to play like this, black is just fighting for a draw after d5. e d5, knight d5, takes on d5. Now queen takes d5, bishop g2 is possible, because of course in case of queen takes d4, white has bishop takes e6 check and they winning the queen. Bishop g2, and which leads to, let's say, check, bishop d2, queen e5 check, bishop e3. Pretty sad position for black. He's just bishop d7, I think, in the theoretical move, and black is just trying to fight for a draw in this position. He's definitely worse, and but some chances to make a draw, but okay, you don't play Sicilian to end up in a worse, positionally worse, because white is just taking on c4, I think twice playing queen d4, and most of the time it ends up in some worse endgame for black, which he sometimes manages to save, sometimes not, but in any case, not to your taste, I'm sure, as a Sicilian player. So maybe e d5 is objectively a better move, and now after bishop e3, black should, at least to get some sense of what he is doing, he should try to take on h4, and as dangerous as it looks, but there is no clear refutation of this, and still white, it's actually a game for two results. After queen f3, black has practically only way of playing is to play like this, queen e4, and trying to change queens, and of course, well, black is pawn up, but he's going to lose the d5 pawn, but there are drawing chances in this position. Again, it is probably objectively the best thing black can do in this variation, but you don't play Sicilian again, yeah, to suffer in the worst endgame and make a draw. So, and if you want to play a real Sicilian, well, white wants just to play g5, and it will lead to similar type of positions, which we have checked, which are not funny for black. So usually black is trying to play h5 with the idea after g5, knight g4, which actually can be playable for black, even though computer still gives some plus for white with this kind of move rook g2. For some reason, I think defending against queen b6 and then followed by f3, it might still be comfortable for white, but that is not the worst. Not the main problem. The main problem is simply g takes h5, knight takes h5, bishop g5. And this position is, it was even played in the World Championship match, 1984, Karpov-Kasparov, the first game of the World Championship match. Of the, I don't know how many, more than 100 games they played with each other in World Championships. It was the very first one. Kasparov managed to make a draw here, but I think he never repeated since then this variation, because, yeah, actually nowadays it just simply became clear again with engines, with some more practice, that it's simply better for white, this position. So let's say knight f6, you can play knight f6, and white just develops queen d2, and black cannot castle anymore, shown clearly on the short side, because he'll just get mated. So he has to try something like this, a6, queen, bishop d7, and try to prepare long castle. But actually the bishop on g5 is very powerful. It's a very strong piece, and white, after long castle, for instance, white has a very unpleasant plan of h5 followed by h6, for instance, yeah. So normally black is trying to play queen c7, but now white can play slowly, but even very direct way of playing h5 is quite dangerous. Knight takes h5, rook h1, for instance, g6 and f4. And again, you see that black's king cannot castle. White wants to start some e5, f5. He's already ready for attack, and black is still, with the king on the center, black still has to finish his development. Extremely dangerous position for black. Or more often black is playing queen b6, but still bishop e3. Well, a typical story, black cannot take on b2 because knight b5 comes, and then he's losing material. So queen c7, queen d2. It's maybe this is a little bit better version for black, but still long castle, bishop d7, f4. Still, it seems that white simply has a fantastic version of very typical Sicilians, because he has this open G line. Of course, yes, pawn structure, h4 pawn in a endgame, in a rook endgame will be weak, but it will not get to rook endgame because there are too many pieces on the board, so this is not such an important factor of the position. This, slightly weak h pawn. I think that the open G line and the active rook on G line is much more important. So now the game can proceed like this: knight f6, knight f3. And the problem also, for instance, if black castles long and he starts to have big issues, queen f2 followed by bishop b6. So b5, and here, even a move e5 is extremely dangerous. Here maybe black holds, but need to be very careful. Or a simple move bishop d3. Again, now the point is that black cannot really do anything with his king in the center. He probably will have to stay in the center forever. And white is very well developed, so b4, an attempt to create counterplay. Even knight a4 is not bad, but even simply knight a2, let's say knight d4, a4, king b1, it's very far from mate. I mean, white is very, very powerfully centralized. Again, the rook is very active on g1, and first of all, it's simply even computer-wise, so to say, it's better for white, but also in a practical game, it's very easy just to get crushed in the center now with black. So somehow I cannot really find, with all respect towards players who like to play with black, this variation. I don't really know what to advise you after g4, because all positions are whether you are just playing some direct variations like e5 or d5, but they are also pretty sad and most of the time just fighting for a draw in a definitely slightly worse position. Or if you want to play in a Sicilian style, just a complicated middle game, well, it's not that complicated. I'm afraid it's just objectively better for white. So that is why, and again, for the white players, I would definitely recommend you to play against this move order g4. I think it's very prosperous for white, and there is absolutely zero reason to avoid playing like this with white. So that is knight f6 d6 move order. And since we are already investigating this Scheveningen systems with d6 and e6 in this position, then I would also like to show you knight c6. Let's say knight c3. We will consider other moves later, and d6. So this is another way of playing this structure. This is maybe a little better, because at least g4 is not so powerful now. But still, I believe that this system is in crisis now. If white knows how to play, I think that it's more difficult for white here. But again, I think after just studying this course, this lesson, I think would be enough for white player to play this variation. And I believe objectively black is experiencing problems here as well. So let's investigate this move order, knight c6 and d6. Actually, I've played myself this system with black a few times in classical chess against top players, and not that I was so happy about the positions which I was getting, but it is playable, or maybe it was playable, because of course the stronger the engines are, more problems they started to show for black in this position. And finally I gave it up. I couldn't really find a way how to solve all problems with black. I think the main move is bishop e3 here. That's what I would definitely recommend you to play in this position. g4 actually still, even if the knight is on g8, it's still a serious move here, and I think it was played by Alexei Shirov against me in Monaco in rapid chess. It was a complicated game, finally ended in a draw. I was even slightly better at some point already. Here, black is usually, well, the big difference is that black already put the knight on a7, sometimes on g6, you know, or taking on d4, another knight goes to c6. So at least g4, g5 doesn't come with a tempi, which is quite important. Bishop e3, a6, and this position is definitely playable for black. Also for white. I mean, white has chances for advantage here. For instance, he can try to play just like this in a typical manner, yeah, h4, f4. But again, of course, it is compared to this Keres variation positions when the knight is on d7 and black and white already played g5 with a tempi. This is a much better version for black, but still not so easy. For example, this is a typical way of playing for black. At least now the knight gets to c6, bishop g2. Okay, complicated position, probably quite favorable, slightly more favorable for white, but it's a game. It's a game. If you like the structures with black, you can definitely play like this. Or another way, sometimes white is trying to avoid the exchange, playing knight b3, let's say b5, f4, bishop b7, and now again there is a move h4, queen e2 makes sense also, maybe followed by bishop g2, but yeah, it's definitely not so easy for black, but it's pretty playable. And I remember, for example, there was a very beautiful game. Judith Polgar beat Alexei Shirov with black in this variation. You can have a look at it in a very nice style. So g4, I wouldn't be so worried, and I was not when I played this variation. I was very much concerned about bishop e3 move. So now knight f6, sooner or later you have to play it, because of course now this play with knight e7 doesn't make much sense already, since white haven't played g4. He would just quickly play for castle, queen d2 castle, and just be better, or at least remove his knight to avoid knight takes d4, knight c6. So that was not the idea. Okay, you can start with a6, but even after queen d2 anyway, probably knight f6 will be played, so sooner than later. That's why knight f6 usually the move. And this is the position. I mean, actually the problem of this variation for black is that white has quite a choice of very serious, dangerous systems here. For example, he can try to play bishop c4 in this position, and this leads to let's say bishop e7, queen e2, to this very famous Velimirovich attack with a lot of theory. Very dangerous for black, really dangerous. Probably black is holding there, but you need to know really a lot because white gets a very direct play. I will not go into it because I believe white has even better options than that, but that is one of the problems that, you know, if you want to play this variation, you need to learn lots of systems. Most of them are quite dangerous. As a move 7th f4, I played myself once like this as well, or at least once. Actually, I've won a very beautiful game against Veselin Topalov in blindfold chess, Monaco. Also advise you to have a look at it just from the aesthetic pleasure, especially the final position. Also a very serious variation. I think Veselin played a6 against me, queen f3, bishop d7, but I think that should be in white's favor because he makes long castle and then has a very active position. The more principle is to play with the 7th e5, and now the main theory goes like this: knight f3, knight g4. Black manages to take this bishop, but still long castle, then knight gets to d5, king b1, castle, king b1. Still, I believe white wants to play bishop c4. It's probably a bit better for white, this position, because it will be difficult to avoid exchanging this bishop on d5 one day. white will have a certain initiative. The main line is bishop e7, and now white's idea is to develop like this: queen f3, long castle, and then it's actually would be quite a nice development, very active. But now probably e5 is a very critical variation. I'll just give you the main line, the most important line in this system. And probably black holds there, but you need really to check it. Takes f5. So white's play is very simple. He just wants to make long castle, g4, g5, and mate. So black has to hurry. Rook b8, long castle, queen a5. Black is trying to organize counterplay, and it's true. Queen b4 is a big threat. So bishop c4, mandatory to put bishop on b3. Now white is ready for his attack. Castles, bishop b3 is important move. It's pretty forced, this variation. Now probably black, because g4, g5 is a very, very big threat, so he has to start a direct line. d5, e takes d5, rook takes b3, c takes b3 has to be played, c d5, rook d5, it's pretty direct. Knight d5, knight d5, bishop h4 is the best move now. f6, queen takes a2, and let's say rook d1 is one of the possible options. I checked it. It was an old theory. I analyzed it with weak computers. I was not sure what's going on. Now with more powerful engines, I checked it a bit. Hard to say if it's enough for black to hold or not. It gives 0-4 after the best move. I don't know what it means. Probably it means that black is holding here. But anyways, also a serious line f4. Another quite serious variation is to play queen d2. By the way, anyway, I would recommend you to start with queen d2. Even if you play my recommendation, the system with f3 and queen d2, probably better to start with queen d2 because knight g4 doesn't seem to work really. There is bishop g5 with a tempi. Even though probably it doesn't make a big difference. You can also start with f3, 7 f3. But queen d2, usually black is playing therefore bishop e7. Now already he wants to go knight g4. And now, f3 will be the main line. We will check it now. That is my main recommendation for white. But also bishop e2 is a very dangerous system, in fact, also. But with the idea, of course, to make long castle. As I have already mentioned, most of the time the most dangerous systems are connected with long castle and then pushing pawns. So a6, black probably has to do this typical counterplay with takes on d4 and b5. f4, now white is playing f4, trying to go g4 next. And then this position, knight d7, let's say, just to avoid d5. g4, b5, g5, rook b8, it's a complicated position. Maybe it's okay for black, hard to say, but it's also a serious system. And maybe you'll be laughing, but there is another also quite dangerous system for white, which is 7 queen e2. So the same idea, white just wants to play long castle, but his queen on e2 is controlling the g4 square, so he doesn't have to lose tempi by playing f3. And also it's very serious. The system, quite a rare guest in the tournament practice. But actually serious. I think I was also planning to seriously considering to play it with white. Because now if black plays bishop e7, long castle, short castle, then what is important with the queen on e2 here, white can just start very directly to play g4 in this position, because after knight d4, bishop d4, also what is important that with the queen on e2, now there is a pin. So after e5, white can just take on e5. And after g4, knight d7, let's say h4 followed by g5, we already know that this type of position is very, very dangerous for black. So probably after queen e2, probably the best is to take on d4, bishop takes d4 and play e5. Of course, in this particular position, it would have been nicer for white to have queen on d2. So that is the idea, to try to make use of the fact that white's queen is on e2. After bishop e3, probably black has to kind of lose half tempi. It would be nice just to play bishop e7 and castle, but queen b5 check seems to be quite unpleasant. And after bishop d7, white can just take on b7. The computer doesn't see a way for black to get enough compensation here for the pawn. So that's why a6. But this position is maybe quite decent for black. I mean, I don't know if it's equal or maybe still white is a bit better, but definitely playable. Lone castle, bishop e6, f3, logical play, rook c8, queen d2, because rook takes e3 was quite an annoying threat. And now, well, white's typical plan is at some point to start pushing the g4, h4, g5. And, well, engines recommend to play h5 here. Also, by the way, important to that you know this typical strategical idea in the Sicilians. It's just stopping this g4, h4, this pawn attack on the king side just by playing h5. Of course, most of the time it happens before black castle. So then bishop e7, queen a5. Maybe this position is pretty playable. But in any case, queen e2 is also a serious move. But actually, I consider the main problem is f3 or queen d2 first, as I mentioned, then f3. So now bishop e7, queen d2. And this or that way, okay, now, of course, you can, actually, engines are showing moves like h5, lone castle, then playing a6. Well, white would probably go king b1, and according to engines, it's not too bad. But I personally am not a big fan of it, because the problem that after h5, probably it will be very difficult to castle already. So black is trying to play with the king on the center, bishop d7, followed by b5. We will also, by the way, consider this type of position via Rouser later, during later lessons. But all in all, it's, even if it's not too bad objectively, I still believe that objectively white has some plus, but it's very difficult to play with black this type of position, because you have to very often to keep the king in the center for a long time, and white has a very healthy, solid position. There is not much really attack black has, so it's more of a positional game. Just the difference is that white has a bit of more space, and his king is much more secure than black's king. So whatever computer pretends that this is not so bad, I would not really recommend you to play it, even at least because of this practical consideration. So castle, that is a classical way of playing this position. And now white has a choice between whether starting with a lone castle or starting with g4. It's all about d5 plan, because if black chooses plan with a6 and b5, then it doesn't really matter. It leads to a transposition. But after lone castle, black has d5 move. So that's why white starts sometimes with g4 just to stop this d5 plan. Even though, again, I don't think that this is good enough to equalize. And as I've already mentioned previously, it also leads to positions which makes you wonder, why did you play Sicilian? Yeah, because here after d5, white has a few ways to just to have a nice initiative, basically risk-free. For instance, bishop b5 is not a bad move. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4. Now if d is and queen f4 is quite unpleasant. Therefore, usually black is playing a6, bishop d3, d4. And now bishop takes e4. And again, white has initiative. I mean, of course, if black develops, he will be fine, but he still has to prove it. Yeah, so white has a healthy position, maybe not too much, but in my opinion, a risk-free position for white. Another way of playing is after d5, strangely enough, king b1 is not so easy. Now, and after d4, knight e4, even this position takes. Again, there is a development issue. Of course, structurally, black has a good position, but he needs to finish his development, which is not so easy. And let's say if he takes in queen c7, trying to manage it like this, followed by rook d8, bishop d7, then even queen c3, forcing black to change queens. And this endgame, yeah, white has initiative. Black still has to prove that he can hold this endgame. probably with very accurate play he can manage a draw here, but zero winning chances, so just defending. And last but not least, actually maybe the most unpleasant, is just ed5. And this position, which was considered to be takes, okay, once of course black takes with e-pawn, he's just slightly worse positionally with isolated pawn, a very typical position where he's just suffering for no big reason. I mean, again, slightly worse without real winning chances, so no point. So it was considered to be queen takes d5 was considered to be fine for black, but actually nowadays engines are not sure about it. Just taking on c6, bishop d3, and in fact it's still, black still has to, it's quite a long way for black to equalize here. And again, the most annoying for any Sicilian player, I suppose, if you're playing black, that you have very few winning chances. So you just play trying accurately to equalize. Let's say bishop d7, bishop d4. White has a nice initiative, more active pieces, is 3 against 2 on the queen side. And even if it's probably holdable, but again, fighting for a draw. Yeah, so frankly, I don't see a reason for white to avoid castles d5, and actually not so much reason for black to play it. But actually he can start with g4, and again, black can play a6 here, then white would probably play long castle, and we will come to the main theory, which we are going to consider now. But sometimes black still tries to play d5, and actually also it's not clear if it's good enough, because g5, knight h5, now after long castle, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop takes g5, probably it's enough to hold for black. Now the best move is considered to be king b1, because if white immediately takes back the pawn, then bishop e6, this is probably okay for black. So king b1, and now, yeah, it's g6 is the best move in this position. Of course, white can always get back the pawn and is in no risk at all, but maybe it's not clear if it's enough really for advantage for white. But f4 is quite a dangerous move here. Actually, after f4, I don't like very much black's position, because the main line goes like this: takes on d4, d4, queen e4, g6. Okay, trying to activate the knight via g7 to f5 somewhere, but again, still bishop g2. You have this unpleasant diagonal. White has initiative. Engines are happy with white here, still do not find a clear equality for black. So all in all, you see that with white you can choose whether to start with g4 if you find that here it's too little for white, whether to start with long castle if you're happy just pressing in a slightly better position. But in any case, for the black players, yeah, both ways, it doesn't seem to be rosy, the life after d5. That's why this is what usually black would do here, because again, it's in the spirit of playing Sicilian, it's playing sharp and aggressive game with counter chances. And I played myself with both colors this position. It was very popular, I remember, beginning of 2000, sometime between, I don't know, 98 and 2005. There were some theoretical discussions here. Things were seemingly not so easy. I mean, sometimes white would get better, sometimes black would get a good counterplay. But actually now again, this mighty engines started to find a very direct way for white to play, and it seems to me that it's very strong, if not simply a refutation of this variation. Frankly, I never felt never felt much trust in black's position here. Anyways, but somehow it was, when you analyze it, was not so easy to with white also, because black had his counter chances. But now I don't see actually what to do for black if white knows, and now you will know this idea that g4, I think it's almost a refutation of this variation now. because black, okay, white just wants to start pushing his pawns, king b1 when he wants. I mean, black cannot really lose time. Yeah, he needs to create counterplay quickly. That's why knight takes d4. This was that way. Okay, sometimes people start with knight d7, but it doesn't change much. I mean, anyways, and you will take and play b5. So there is nothing else really for. So takes, bishop takes d4, b5. And now there is a big theory after king b1, knight d7, h4, a lot of games here. Okay, again, dangerous for black, but not so easy. Black has some counterplay. But now it seems now that simply g5 is really quite a problem for black. Okay, knight h5 is not so good because bishop e3, you protect this pawn, and actually the problem is that at some point, let's say black is playing queen c7, well, there is always this idea of playing bishop h3, bishop g4, which is always dangerous, but somehow computers are not that scared about it. But knight e2 is also very typical plan in many Sicilians in this structure. Just important for you to know that this idea when knight is on h5, you play knight e2 and you want to play knight g3 next. And once you play knight g3, what black can do, because he cannot really exchange the knight on g3 after hg, the h line will be open and he will get mated simply on h line. So probably has to play something like to make the fianchetto of the knight, but it doesn't look good at all because white sooner than later will push h4, h5. So it seems that knight h5 is not good in this position. Knight d7 is played, usually h4, and here queen c7 was supposed to be a move which holds this variation, which makes it playable, but I'm not sure anymore about it. Other moves, okay, b4 is a very straightforward way of playing. Knight a4, that's the point, that knight goes to a4 now, and queen a5, b3. And now situation is pretty bad for black because knight c5, if knight c5, that was already known long ago actually, knight c5. Otherwise, if black plays bishop b7, to start with, even king b1 simply followed by knight b2 is probably not good for black. But actually a3 is also strong, a typical idea, just want to take the pawn. And after d5, computer already showing g6 as a very powerful move, and it's pretty bad for black. The idea, I suspect, that after fg, bishop h3, attacking the pawn on e6, and you cannot protect it. So bishop b7 is not good, but also knight c5 is not working. White just takes on c5 and simply plays bishop b2, and this a2 pawn is not, it doesn't matter, because queen a2, black is just too slow with his counterplay, and white is very close to mate. So after queen f4, actually it's simply lost for black. White has a decisive attack. To start with, white wants queen c7 just to trap the bishop, strangely enough. And after rook a7, bishop c4, and white is going queen e5, rook g1 is going to mate quickly here. It's just bad for black. So the best is rook d8, white can just play queen h2, and again, black is not in time to pick up the a2 pawn, and it's just much worse. I mean, now he will not have much counterplay. White has a very comfortable c4 square for the bishop. He's positionally better, plus potentially having a very dangerous attack. So this is not playable for black. Rook b8 is a typical move, but here it's losing important tempi. For instance, after king b1 is very useful always. Now b4, why otherwise we play rook b8, knight a4, and actually white is an important tempi because after bishop b7, b3, let's say bishop c6, knight b2, actually you need rook on a8 now, because black's plan is to play a5, a4 to try to create some play on a line, but you lost a very important tempi, so white will be definitely quicker in this position with his play, pushing maybe rook g1, h5, g6, or sometimes even direct g6 works. So this is pretty bad for black, this position as well. Then what else? Bishop b7, yeah, makes a lot of sense, of course, bishop b7, but then white already plays a3. That's why, yeah, he was not hurrying with king b1, because once bishop b7, a3, and you don't have this typical plan, which is after, let's say, if white plays a3 before bishop b7, then usually black is trying to play rook b8 with a bishop on c8 and push b4 to organize counterplay on the b line. Here he doesn't have this plan already, and also, let's say after queen a5 doesn't change, because king b1 and b4, of course, already I can just go and take the pawn on b4 because of the pin. So he has to lose tempi playing bishop c6, but this position is okay, black is very close to get mated also, yeah, so this tempi might be decisive simply. After rook g1, rook b8, h5, well, white attack is already very powerful. And the problem is that still black is still not in time for the moment. He cannot still play b4 because ab rook b4 knight d5 tactics is very strong. Yes, because the rook is hanging. And in case of rook takes d4, there is intermediate knight e7 check, yeah, and white is just winning. So, and g6 is coming, so knight e5 is almost only move, and this position is actually just bad for black. Both queen e3 is strong, and queen f2. I'm threatening bishop takes e5, and also f4 g6. White is just one tempi quicker, and after queen a5, black wants to play b4, and the last maybe very accurate move, knight a2, just stopping b4, and f4, f5, g6 probably will lead to a rather quick demolition of black's position. So bishop b7 is also not good. That's why queen c7 was actually the move which was supposed to hold the line. But now, okay, a3 is still quite dangerous, but at least black plays rook b8 and then knight e5, and quite often at some point playing b4. So it's also not so clear if black has enough here. But that is definitely playable. Most often white would play king b1 in this position, a very typical, also in the Sicilian, very important to know this very typical move. Most of the time you need to play it in such structures, and this is a very, very rare occasion when it's better, it's maybe simpler not to make this very important prophylactic move. So again, the idea of bishop b7, as we know already, a3, we are winning tempi, because black has to play bishop c6 and only then rook b8, and white in the meantime will push h5, g6, so not good. That's why b4 is almost obligatory for black. Now knight e2, a5 is not so clear, because now already, let's say if white is playing h5, then black very often has this plan, playing e5. It's much more difficult to mate with this structure, because of course the knight kicked out from the d5 square, it's on e2 now, not on c3. And okay, this position is actually not so clear. Black has his own play also. But so that's why before knight a4 is important. Again, in general, it's very important question in such positions. With knight on a4, usually it's strange enough, it stays pretty well in those positions, because then followed by b3, in a way it first of all takes away some squares, but also it stops black from kind of attack a5, a4. So it's always knight a4 usually is good only in the case if black immediately attacks this knight, like bishop b7 here. For example, if white is playing b3, bishop c6, knight b2, then a5. And you see that the rook on a8 is quite important, that black haven't played rook b8. So now he can start a4, sometimes e5 again, and some counterplay on the a line. So this is very unclear, this position. Black might be in time with his counterplay. So that's why after bishop b7, white's best, strangely enough, is to take this pawn. Simply queen takes b4, bishop c6, knight c3. And I remember I analyzed a lot this position. I mean, it looks quite scary for white, yeah, to open up this b line. For instance, the best for white is after, let's say, rook fc8 or first rook b8. It's the same. strangely enough, to play queen c4, and after rook b8 the best move is queen e2, because otherwise queen can get under attack, and this position visually looks quite scary for white. But computers are given an advantage for white, so don't see enough compensation. And I remember when analyzing it long ago, I also couldn't find enough compensation for black. Somehow, with a very, very accurate play, it always turned out to be that white would manage to defend and to keep his extra pawn. But okay, this position is very sharp, complicated, and definitely playable for black. So that was the state of affairs of the system, and that's why it was supposed to be, queen c7 was supposed to be a very good move, and the situation was not so clear. But it seems that now engines, I think Stockfish was the first one, or AlphaZero maybe found it. I don't remember. There was an engine game, and actually just simply h5. And frankly, to me, it looks like it's practically a refutation of black's plan. So h5, of course, the problem was of h5, because otherwise, why wouldn't you just start pushing the pawn? Just want to play g6. So the problem was before here. Before, and now, again, if knight goes to e2, then, as we know already, black can, I mean, maybe knight e5, but in general, black can always try to play e5 in these positions. And then, as we know, that it's becoming much more difficult to mate, yes, and then black has time, maybe a5, knight b6 for his counterplay. Therefore, knight a4. Now e5, bishop e3 is already in white's favor. As I've told you, knight on a4 is actually quite good here. And let's say in case of queen a5, b3 simply, and white gets his bishop to c4, g6. It's pretty bad for black already here. But yeah, if knight c5, then g6 is very strong. It's very direct, g6, and knight a4 is just mate, gh, king h7, bishop g7, mate in 12 according to engine. If it shows mate in 12, I believe it should be true. So h6 is only move, and now simply white takes the pawn, takes, and just the pawn up, and very powerful, very unpleasant pawn on g6. So this position is quite bad for black. But the problem was queen a5, that was the point. And I remember in our times, well, okay, I analyzed a lot g6, and now bishop g5, f4, bishop h6, and this position is not clear at all. Actually, bishop is quite good on h6, protecting the king. And in case of b3, bishop takes g5, f4, bishop h6. Also, I couldn't actually find anything very clear, and after all, it's a pawn. Black wants to play e5. But nowadays engines are showing +1 here for white, and the idea that after bishop takes g5, simply playing bishop e3. So now somehow getting more back into positional play. Let's say if you exchange on e3, so I understand white's idea is on top of course, attack on the g line, but simply to take back the pawn on d6. And after bishop e3, it seems that black is in real trouble now. Of course, if he comes back with a bishop, white just starts to mate on the g line. I mean, if he goes bishop e7, I guess it will not end well on the g line. And in case of h6, it's maybe a relatively best move for white, but still for black. But still, he just shows f4, rook g1, followed by f5 and +1. The assessment, well, it probably means that at least black is not losing by force, but, well, not the position to be happy with anyways, and especially if computer approves that it's much better for white. So, and after b3, queen takes g5, yeah, simply bishop e3, queen e5, and just king b1, and okay, white opened up his line, the g line, so he wants to start direct attack on the g line, and after bishop f6, bishop d4, again, now surprisingly this endgame is pretty bad for black. Again, the engines are given more than +1 here, because he takes back the pawn on d6, and actually with this knight on a4, which is very powerful, and It simply has a, well, it says that white is just much better positionally, just having a positionally better endgame. So to summarize, yes, it seems that those Scheveningen systems are now in trouble because of, in case if you play it in a classical way like this, then I believe g4 is very serious, even though bishop e3. If you play this Najdorf with a bishop on e3, then you can easily play bishop e3. There is nothing better for black to play with a a6, with a knight c6. And knight c6 will be a transposition. So that is the problem for black. And with this move order, which is maybe a bit more playable, then I believe that g4 is interesting for white, but not so clear. But this bishop e3, knight f6, again, white has, as I mentioned, many interesting systems here, but this system f3 is, for the moment, I don't really see how to equalize with black. I mean, black is in serious trouble in my opinion, but again, we are talking about a very top level. Otherwise, if not this development of theory and very powerful engines which found, for example, this idea of sacrificing the pawn on g5 in the main line, it would have been definitely playable, and it is playable. It's very sharp, very interesting play, unless if you are playing black, unless your opponent simply studied it very carefully and knows exactly the theory, he had listened to this course, and then it might be a problem. Yeah. So all in all, I believe what I've shown you today is, in general, all those lines are in white's favor, even if they are still, of course, complicated, as most of Sicilian lines. And now we are going to move to the Paulsen system. The next lesson will be about the force a6, and then the most popular move, knight c6, followed by a6 or queen c7. And that would be the e6 package, and we would move to the knight c6 and d6. So next lesson is so-called Paulsen move a6.